Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Caringo Tech Tuesday webinar. This session's topic is how to incorporate cloud into your DR strategy. I'm Ryan Meek, Principal Solutions Architect at Caringo. Today, our guest is Jose Marcos. Jose and I will be available to answer your questions throughout the webinar and at the end of today's presentation and demo. In addition, we have some resources available for you at the attachments and links window. And if you have any questions at all during the presentation, please put it in where it's available to you on BrightTalk, or you can even email it to us later. So I've been with Caringo since about 2006. I joined as a developer and engineer. I've worked in sales and product management. It's been a great run. Very happy to be here. Jose, please introduce yourself to the crowd.
Sure. So, hello everyone. My name is Jose. I've been with Caringo since 2015, more or less. I'm originally from Spain, but I live in Canada now. My role in Caringo is to provide assistance during product evaluations, as well as architect the final storage platform. I also work with different partners to integrate their solutions with Caringo's Run, with our product. Like Ryan said, I'm always available to answer any technical questions, so please feel free to reach out.
I will say Jose is exceedingly talented and exceedingly modest, so we're very happy to have him here with us today. And yeah, please do put any questions you have in for us, and we'll try to handle them. Yeah. So a little more about Caringo. So we were founded in 2005 to change the economics of object storage, really to change the economics of storage at that time, because object storage wasn't even really a thing. And it was really to handle relentless data growth and to do it at speed. Some of the earlier solutions that tried to do it had definite performance problems. And so, you know, we wanted to handle relentless data growth to be high performance and high availability, and with an eye towards compliance and data integrity as well. Today, our solutions are in use all over the world in media and entertainment, high performance computing, and in the government space. Really worldwide, where you have data online, data at scale. So what are we going to talk about in today's webinar? So our topic is broadly disaster recovery. So we'll cover what's a disaster, how you plan for it, how you make a strategy. We'll even have a demonstration, and we'll have question and answer. So what's a disaster? Well, the disasters we're talking about, you may have various disasters in your own lives and in your own summers. Like we have personally, not at Caringo. But we are really talking about natural disasters and man-made disasters. Natural disasters like earthquakes, volcanoes, floods, droughts, anything that could hit your office or your data center where your servers are located. And really man-made disasters too. Most often these are you know, power cycles, power outages, waters, floods. In a previous life, I was at a company where we had a situation like this that was triggered by an employee kicking a wall, an electrical outlet out of a wall socket. So it can really be a variety of circumstances. And so when, yeah, that kind of thing happens in a data center, and relating to, is just one copy of your data enough? You may remember back to 2008 at a company called The Planet, which was actually in Texas. They were then the 4th largest hosting provider in the US. They had a fire that dropped thousands of servers, and thousands of companies were affected. So you may sort of think of things these days as, well, you know, these data centers are generally more reliable, but, you know, the bigger they are, the harder they fall in a lot of cases. And in this case, SLAs were violated, credits were triggered, data was lost, and eventually the planet disappeared as a commercial entity. I think probably most people listening to this won't even remember who they were, even though it really wasn't that long ago. So with all that said, I'd like to turn it over to Jose Marcos for a little more of an in-depth approach into disaster recovery and how to plan for it.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Ryan. So let's talk about the strategy we should consider for the data protection and disaster recovery. Essentially, we have to be sure that we cover all our bases, right? And in order to do so, we have to start by doing some risk analysis. It starts by having a comprehensive list of assets we want to protect. In our case, that will be what data needs to be protected. We will also need to identify the risks. As Ryan mentioned before, those usually are natural disasters or man-made. On man-made ones, we have accidental errors, but also we can have a malicious attack that could jeopardize our data. Then we will need to assess the potential consequences in case some of our data or all of it is actually damaged, right? And finally, we will have to document all the steps and all the results that we have after doing this risk analysis. So it's a kind of a comprehensive step, but it's probably the first and most important one to do it. There are two concepts that correlate with the previous point. Those are RPO and RTO. So RPO is recovery point objective. It answers the question, how far back is the amount of data that can be lost before causing any harm to our company. On the other hand, RTO is recovery time objective. It answers the question, how long did it take to recover the service? It refers to how much time an application or service can be down without causing significant damage to the business. We have also taken into consideration the steps that IT must take to restore the application and recover the service. The next step that we have listed there is to define the retention policies. Again, it answers, or we have to answer several questions like, for how long do I need to store my data? Where am I going to store it? How do I plan to access it? Is it required to have the same retention for the on-site copy than the off-site one? So yeah, all of these steps essentially will help you to plan ahead in case a disaster happens, right? And at this point, you probably realize that having an on-site copy and an off-site copy of your data is the right thing to do. Okay, so let's move now to how we can protect the data, in this case on-site, by using Caringo Swarm object storage. The first point to highlight about Swarm is that is the Swarm architecture itself, as it doesn't have any kind of single point of failure in it. It's a symmetric architecture, meaning that we don't have any kind of metadata servers or separate caching proxies or anything like that. Caringo Swarm supports and encourages you to use erasure coding. Erasure coding is a data protection technique. Basically, it slices your data, your files, objects into data segments and parity segments, and spread those segments across multiple servers in the cluster. So if you have a broken disk or if you have a server that is not responding, you can still access your data thanks to this, data protection technique. We also support remote replication of all of our stored data. It means that we can have a Swarm cluster replicating to another Swarm cluster, in a different site, in a different location. We can also do something like stretch clusters. So it means that having a single cluster, but split the nodes into two physical locations, right? So in case something happens, I will have, my cluster is up and running on a different site all the time, right? So that's another possibility. We also have a feature called integrity seals. They're essentially hashes, and we use these hashes in two ways. One of them is basically to make sure that the information is not tampered with, and that this is a feature that our federal customers, government customers value a lot. And also, integrity seals help us to prevent transmission errors when we are accessing data or when we are pushing data to a cluster. Another point that is quite important and that is kind of unique to Caringo Swarm is active recovery. So active recovery means that all the nodes participate in the recovery effort. And when something happens, the nodes or the cluster automatically realize that you have a broken disk. And, it's moving parts. This will fail eventually, right? So we have to be preparing something like that happens. So with active recovery on Swarm, all the nodes will participate in that recovery effort, which means that you will have your data, again, in other healthy parts of the cluster, replicated in other healthy parts of the cluster in no time, thanks to this symmetric architecture. So if you compare that to RAID, when you are trying to rebuild a 10, 12 terabyte disk drive on a RAID system, it will take days or weeks even, right? With Swarm, you can rebuild your data in just a matter of hours instead. And we rebuild only the affected data, not the disk itself. So it's very, very efficient. Another feature that relates to the multi-site approach is called remote synchronous write. What it does is essentially that you upload something to a specific endpoint, and when you upload that file, it's actually written in two different clusters at the same time. And the client application will receive the OK, it's written type of acknowledgement once the data is present in both clusters, right? So it's another way of protecting your data thanks to Caringo Swarm. Let's move on to the next one. So now that I know what are the the benefits of my Swarm architecture, how do I incorporate cloud into my disaster recovery strategy? There are essentially two approaches, if you wish. The first one will be the hard way, as stated there. The hard way involves that, okay, I have to talk to my S3 cloud provider, Wasabi, AWS, whatever cloud provider you want to use, and making sure that I set up my account, I do the payments as they come, and I set up permissions to be able to upload to the bucket. I create the bucket, set the policies, and so on. Next, I will have to configure my Swarm to be able to replicate to that S3 cloud endpoint, and that's the most easiest way the most simple way to do it. So, but also we have to make sure that we can recover the data and what is the procedure I need to follow to recover the data and to get my service up and running. So that's the hard way. It's essentially that you take care of doing all of this, right? Swarm provides you the feature or the ability to replicate data to the cloud, but you have to do it, right? You have to document in your procedures how to do it and so on. There is another approach, and there must be a better way, right? So that's our Caringo Cloud DR service. Essentially, let Caringo do it for you, right? So we will take care of, creating the bucket in the S3 provider and making sure that the replication is happening. And if you want to recover something, we will be able to help you to do that and to guide you through the process. So you don't really need to worry about that. So I think, Ryan, perhaps you can talk a little bit more about our Swarm Cloud DR service.
Hey, so I would be happy to. We did have a question come in. Where is the best place to find more information about how Swarm protects your data? Which I don't mean to put out there to stump you, Jose, but I would point out that we do have a Smarts of Swarm white paper linked in the resources for this webinar. So you should be able to have good access to some good answers in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. And we always are, here to help you if you have any questions or you want to dive into any specific details.
Exactly. So a few more details about Swarm Cloud DR. So this is, as Jose was saying, this is the version where we're providing it as a service, Cloud DR as a service, so that especially so that you can add, DR capabilities without going to a data center. I mean, right now, especially with what's going on in the world, I think it's nice to be able to turn up a DR strategy or a DR option without going to a data center, without racking and stacking. It's not necessarily terrible to have to go do that, but in some cases, I think putting DR on someone's checklist, it was on their checklist for the summer or the fall or this year, but maybe access to the data center has been either interrupted or it's irregular. So this is also a good way to take care of that without sort of leaving the comforts of working from home. So specifically, it is Swarm and Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage. You can direct that to the Wasabi data center of your choice. It does come with 3 years of storage and access. And as Jose was pointing out, a recovery, if one should happen to be done, would be managed by Caringo. We could take over and facilitate that process. So quickly add hassle-free distributed disaster recovery. That is the product, and I think it's quite a nice option to add for this year especially. And with that, let's have Jose take us into the demo.
Sure, happy to. Let me share my screen. I believe that you can see my screen now.
We can.
Is that right, Ryan? Okay, very nice. So what you have on the screen right now is the Swarm Storage UI. So it's the web UI we use to manage the infrastructure, to manage the Swarm storage nodes. So the first thing that you see on this console is the dashboard. On this dashboard, you can find information about the status of the cluster, the health of the cluster. It's as simple as if it's in green, everything is okay. If something goes wrong, you will see red lights instead of everything in green, right? On the right-hand side, we have the user space that we have currently in use, the number of objects that we are streaming on this site as well. And we have some information regarding the communication with our indexer engine, as well as the requests that are coming from the clients and the responses that the cluster is providing to those requests. So very, very high-level information on this first screen that you have here, but you can dive into very, very specific details. Most of the time, this is the only screen that you actually need to look at, because if something happens in the cluster, like you have a hardware failure or something like that, the cluster will take care of rebuilding the data for you. So there is no recover this disk button or anything like that. So the cluster is automatically and proactively recovers the data and sets the data as far as from which copy as possible. So you will get more performance and you will get more data protection out of the cluster. So let's see how we actually configure a replication feed to an S3 provider. So in this case, I will have to go to the cluster section and go to feeds. Feeds is the mechanism that we call when we have to communicate the cluster with some external entity. So if I click on add, I have a type of feed called S3 backup. Okay, so let's click on S3 backup, and I just need to give it a name, something that is descriptive of what I'm going to do. I can either replicate my entire object storage cluster or only a specific endpoint, a specific domain, right? So in this case, I'm going to replicate this data.demo.com endpoint that I have in this cluster. And then I have to select what is the target S3 provider. So I'm going to use Wasabi for this example. So I'm just putting all my credentials and all the information, the connection information for Wasabi. So that would be the endpoint in Wasabi, the region of Wasabi, and then the bucket that I'm going to use. The last step is just to include my credentials here. So I need to put the access key in, and as well as the secret key. And that's it pretty much. So when I click on save, the feed is saved, and then I will have it that a queue of the number of objects that are going to be replicated. I actually configured this before starting this today's demo. So I have already all this information in Wasabi. So I can show you how it looks like in both the local Swarm cluster as well as in Wasabi, right, in the S3 provider. So as you can see, before I do that, if I go just down a little bit on the dashboard, now we have this S3 backup feed, and it's active, and then it will let you know, how it's progressing with the replication here. Once we have this relationship, this disaster recovery copy running for a few days, we'll get something similar to what we have on this guy up here. So you can see, how data is replicating or how much data is replicating, across several days, right? So moving on to the Swarm portion, to the local cluster, right? So this is the data.demo.com endpoint or storage domain, as we call it, that I am replicating to Wasabi. I have 3 packets, essentially case studies, some videos, and some wallpapers. So I can just use any of, here, any of these guys. So you can see something, on the, this is actually streamed out directly from the Swarm storage cluster on premises, right? And well, if I go, for instance, to wallpapers, have some wallpapers here, and I can get a preview of the wallpaper. I can share this as a link for someone, or even download the actual wallpaper like that. So now that I have my replication going on to Wasabi, if I jump to Wasabi side, so this is the Wasabi console, what you are seeing on this bucket on Wasabi is actually the same information that we have in our local cluster. So as you can see, all the data has been replicated to Wasabi. And that's the way that you ensure that you have an external copy of your data in case you are hit by any kind of disaster.
And you didn't have to go to a data center.
Demo. Yeah, essentially, yeah. And yeah, remember that we're always happy to help. If you get the service with us, well, basically we will take care even of restoring your data, help you to restore your data and put it back where it belongs to on the local cluster as well. So let's keep that in mind.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that demo, Jose. I think that makes it very clear what it looks like in our user interfaces, how to configure it, what it looks like at the endpoints, and how it would be provided. So thank you everyone for joining us, and thanks again, Jose, for that demo. To keep up with Caringo, follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook. If you have additional questions or would like to schedule a custom demo, please email us at info@caringo.com. We'd also like to invite you to join us in September for our next Tech Tuesday webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.